Hey everybody, MS Farzan here, and welcome to the next part in the series of making a 2D card game with Unity. We're literally picking up where we left off in the previous video, where we have a moderately working 2D card game, a multiplayer card game, where I can draw cards and you can draw cards, and we're able to connect the dots between them so that I get to see your cards, you get to see mine, and when I drag and drop cards, you see them, and when you drag and drop cards, I see them. Just to remind you that I have two things open right here. I have a game that has been built and is running almost like a standalone game. I have the editor here also open that is running as a client, and that's what we're communicating with one another. Just hit stop here, and I'll hit stop here as well. When I click on host in my network heads up display, I have this nice, beautiful screen which has a player area, an enemy area, and a drop zone here, and a draw cards button. When I run this as a client, that communicates over the local host port 7777 with the server. You'll recall this scene is running as both a server and a client, which is why we call it a host, whereas this screen is called just a client. When I hit draw cards in my client, they appear in the player area of my client, but they appear in the enemy area of yours. And whereas I can't drag the cards that appear in your client because you don't have authority over them, I have authority over them, so I can drag them around and do stuff. When you draw cards, the same thing happens. You can drag them around. They appear in my screen, but I can't drag them around. When you drop a card in the drop zone, it sends a command to the server to replicate that in my screen, and when I do the same, it does the same in your client. So this is working as intended. But we talked about in the previous video how we wanted to add a couple of features and functionality here. Namely, one of them is that when you are dealt cards, you want to be able to see them, but you don't want me to see them, and I don't want you to see my cards either. So we're going to deal with that now. Before we get really into it, I just want to make a mention again that you can find the GitHub for all this stuff in the description area of this video. You'll also find some helpful articles and links to videos that have been helpful for me in coming up with this tutorial. So please be sure to go and check those out for further reading and further viewing. I'm sure that you already have if you watched the previous video in this series, but they'll be really helpful in understanding some of the basic concepts that we're talking about. And if you've just come to this video by chance, please work through the video prior to this one. I'll link it at the end of this video. That's creating a 2D card game in Unity Part 3. That's the beginning of the multiplayer aspect of this tutorial. And because a lot of this stuff probably just won't make sense if you haven't watched that video already. Cool. Okay, so let's go to our scripts. Let's see here. We have created all of this logic so that when we run RPC show card, which is a remote procedure call to each client that's sent by the server, that is saying the logic here is that if the type of that remote procedure call is played, we want to set the parent of the card to the drop zone. The way that we've handled this is we've said in the drag drop script that when the card is over the drop zone, we want it to, in the client, to set its parent to the drop zone within the client, and we set is draggable to false so that we can't drag it anymore. We determine what the network identity is attached to the client that we're working on, and then we find the player manager. And when we drop a card, we run the play card function in the player manager script, passing to it the game object that this script is attached to, which is one of our cards. It then runs play card, which all that does is passes the card that we just sent to it and to a command play card function. You'll recall that a command is something that a client asks of the server. The client says, "Hey server, do this thing." And when it does that, it says, "Hey server, I got a new card that's been played. Run the RPC show card, the remote procedure call that tells all clients to update where the card is." And that's how we get it to connect. When I drop a card in the drop zone, it fires a message to the server saying, "Hey, show all the cards, show all the clients that are in this session what card was played, and drop it in the drop zone." And that's what we use the remote procedure call for. We're going to mess with that. We're also going to mess with this command deal cards. You'll recall this is called when we click this button here, that's draw cards. It then on click it finds the player manager in the client, and then it runs command deal cards, which in the player manager it's a pretty simple command that says, "Hey server, iterate 5 times and instantiate a random card from my list, and spawn them. Give its authority to me, the client who called it, and then show those cards to everybody in the that is in this game session. Basically, show it to me and also show it to the other player, and say that this card was dealt." The reason why we're using this type dealt or played is just to determine what happens when the cards are dealt versus when they're played. We want them to be parented to different components. Whether if they're dealt, we want them to be parented to the player area or the enemy area, whereas if they're played, we want them to be parented to the drop zone. That's all that's happening there. Okay, cool. So what I need to do here is I need to think that if the card is being played to me, if it's my card, it's appearing here in my player area. If it's your card, it's appearing here in the enemy area. But I don't necessarily want you to be able to see my cards, and vice versa. So when it appears in my scene, in my client, a card should be showing its card back rather than its card front. And same goes for your client. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a new script, which is called Card Flipper. And we'll do that on the card, each of the card prefabs themselves. Let's go down here and add a component and call it, well, we need a new script. This new script will be called Card Flipper. And ordinarily, when we do that, it creates it in the root directory of your asset. So I'm going to move that over to my scripts folder. And I'm going to also make sure that I've added it to my card 2 prefab. Add component, Card Flipper. Okay, nothing in it yet, but that's okay. I'm going to edit this script. And it's actually going to be pretty easy for me to do. It's going to require me to add a little bit of logic to say, when am I going to flip this card, and what does it look like when I do that? This might be useful for you if you have a game that requires you to flip cards at other points in the game, not just when the game starts. So feel free to use this as you will. We're going to be using it as a network component, but it might be valuable for you in other ways. And we're going to say here that we're using the Unity Engine .ui namespace because we're going to do stuff with images. You might recall that in our other scripts dealing with network behavior, we've been deriving them from, well, we've been using the mirror namespace and deriving the classes from network behavior. We don't actually need to do that here because all of this work is going to be done client side. I haven't tested this to see if it is not helpful with cheat prevention, because as we'll see, the cards are still going to live on your client. We're just changing the sprite that's attached to them. So like a cheater might be able to access this information, and that's not my expertise, so I'm not really sure. That if that's a concern for you, then you might have to look into a different way of doing this. But we're going to delete the start and update functions, and we're going to declare a public sprite called card front and a public sprite called card back. And we're going to create a public void flip method. And what flip does, well, it's going to take a sprite called current sprite and make that equal to GameObject.getComponent image dot sprite. Okay, let's look at that. Right now, if I look at my card one, it just has an image here, and the source image is this cyan ping asset that we used in the previous video. This thing, the card front. Cool. So that, if I said, like if I'm looking at the editor and I say game object, this game object, the prefab, dot get component image dot sprite, that's what this is. That's where this lives. If I want to change it, I have to use that code. While I'm here, I'm just going to go to my assets folder, and I'm going to say the card front is this cyan ping. The card back is the cyan back. And I'll do the same for my card 2 prefab. I've exposed these in the editor using them as public game objects. The card front is the magenta, the exact same one as up here. I have this magenta ping sprite. And the card back is the magenta back. Cool. So if I were to run this right now, the current sprite equal to GameObject.getComponentImage.sprite, it would return the card front, the magenta or cyan card front, depending on which prefab I chose. So what I'm doing first is I'm saying that whatever the current sprite is, it should be equal to the I want to store that in current sprite. And then I'm going to do a check here, and I'm going to say if current sprite is equal to card front, well, get that sprite GameObject.getComponentImage.sprite and make it the card back. Think about how that works. If I'm saying if I want to flip this card, I'm saying, well, get the sprite. If it's the card front, make it the card back. The rest of it pretty much writes itself. Else, GameObject.getComponentImage.sprite equals card front. So get the current sprite, store it in this current sprite variable. If that current sprite is the card front, well, change it to the card back. If it's not, if it's the card back, change it to the card front. So you can just flip to your heart's content. Like I said, that may not be great for cheat prevention if like the card exists in your scene, it just has a different sprite. But this is the easiest way I've found to make it work. So if cheating is a concern in your game, you might have to look into a different way of doing this. Okay, now let's go back to our player manager script, and let's tell the game what to do. So we don't need to change anything in our command deal cards, and we also don't need to do much with our command play card. But what we do need to do is in our RPC show card, the remote procedure call that is from the server telling the clients what to do. We need to say if the card has authority, set if if the client has authority, meaning if these are my cards, just show them in my player area. Otherwise, set the transform, set the parent of the transform to the enemy area, as we have been doing. Nothing new there. And card.getComponent, card flipper, access the card flipper script or class, flip. So if it's not my card, just flip the card, and I don't need to see it. Let's just run that and make that work for us. Control B to build, and I wait for the game to build so that I can have one that acts as the host, meaning a server and a client, and the other one just working as a client. Play in my editor. Now I'm the host, or you're the host, and let's say I'm the client. Now I draw cards, or you draw cards, and they show up as the backs of those cards. And you can tell that it's working properly because I've got blue, pink, blue, blue, pink, blue, pink, blue, blue, pink. When I draw cards, I've got blue, 3 pinks, blue, blue, 3 pinks, blue. Same stuff. So now you can't see my cards and I can't see your cards, which is great. The one problem arises now, not really a problem, it's just one line of code that we need to add, that when I drag and drop one of my cards, it shows up as a card back in your game. Same here. If I drag and drop, or if you drag and drop a card, it shows up as the card back in my game because we haven't told the game to flip the card again. We just need to do that. That's fine. No big deal. So I stop it from playing. Alt F4 to get out of this. And so I'm saying else if type played. Remember, if we look at our drag drop script, when we drop the card, it runs play card, and then that goes to that issues a command to the server to then pass all this information to the RPC show card method that we've been dealing with the remote procedure call with the type played. When a card is played, we set the transform to the drop zone, and we also want to say if exclamation mark has authority, card.getComponent, card flipper dot flip. So you'll recall from the previous video that the authority, it determines who can take network actions on a specific game object. I'm by this by spawning, when I spawn this these cards, or when the server spawns the cards, I have asked the server to give authority to the connection to client, or basically the client that is asking for them to be spawned. And so what I'm saying here is that if the client that is running this remote procedure call does not have authority, I want you to flip that card. That means that when you play a card and it shows up in my screen, I don't have authority over it. I can't take network actions over it. So just flip that card for me. That's basically letting the client know, hey, this isn't your card, so therefore you should go ahead and flip it. That's one way of getting it to getting the logic to flip the card for you. If I let all cards, if I didn't have this here, if I just say everybody flip it, then when I played my cards, which I have authority over, then I would see the backs of those cards because it would be automatically flipping the card when the cards dropped, which is not what I want. Save this, build the scene, and then I'm going to go ahead and play it. Where's my game? Here it is. You're the host. I'm the client. Draw cards. Draw cards. We both draw cards. They show up on each other's screens as the card backs. Now, when I drop a card, it doesn't change in my scene, but it sure does in your scene. You see there's one less blue card up here. It's appeared in your drop zone, and it's face up. When you draw, well, let's look at this. There's 2 pink cards over here. When you drop a pink card, there's one less pink card over here, the card back, and it has appeared here in the drop zone facing up. that's the functionality we want for this game. Yours might be different, but I think I call that a win. That's exactly the functionality that we want to have here. So that pretty much completes the basic functionality of our multiplayer card game. There might be some other things that you want to do, and I want to expose them to you, not because I'm the expert on them, certainly far from that, but just some things to think about, because you might have a card game that needs to keep track of different things. And if you check out the mirror networking tutorials and specifically the documentation and the videos that I've linked in the description of this video and of the previous video, you'll see that there's a whole lot of stuff that you can do if you're trying to sync variables and events and lists and like everything. There's just so much stuff. So I'm going to give you just a couple of pointers of what to look for. Although I must say I haven't tested all this stuff, so your mileage may vary with it. I don't want to make it a core component of the game right now. But it's definitely stuff that you should look into for your own game. I'm going to close this stuff. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my back into my player manager script. And I'm going to establish what's called a sync var or sync variable. This is a variable that you want synced across all clients and server and everything in your game. And this is going to be a really simple sync var. You have to write a tag just like you would for a command or a remote procedure call called sync var. I'm just going to say int cards played is equal to 0. Nothing special. Just I want to track the number of cards that are played. This could be like, I don't know, enemy health or player health or some other integer or other variable that you want to use. And you can even create a sync list or a sync event. Those are much more complicated than just a basic sync var. And then where I'm going to use this is in the play card function, which is why we wrote this the way that we did. You'll recall that when I click the button, I just run this public command deal cards. Whereas when I drop a card, I have a couple of layers of abstraction here. I have when I drop a card, I run the play card function that passes the game object to command play card, which then passes the game object to the remote procedure card, which shows all of the cards in their correct places in all of the clients. The reason why I've done this is because you might want to do a check for whether or not the client actually has authority before calling command play card. Or in this case, we want to do some other stuff on the client side where we say we want to do command play card, meaning asking the server to do something for us. We also want to increment cards played. And we want to debug as a log cards played. So when a card's dropped, not only send a command to the server, remember as a client, we want to increment cards played, which is a synced variable, and we want to log that to our console to make sure that it's incrementing properly. So let's do that. Let's save it. Let's go into our scene and let's build a scene by pressing Control B. Wait for that. Maybe get a sandwich or whatever you need to do. And when that's done, instead of you being the host this time and me being a client, I'm going to do this differently. And there's a reason for this. There's always a reason. I'm going to run as the host. You're going to run as a client. I draw cards. You draw cards. Everything's working as it should. I'm going to move over to my console here. I just get a little bit of network logs here before working. Now I drag and drop a card, and I just see 1. I have dropped 1 card, so cards played is equal to 1. Then I drop another card, and I don't get a log here because I'm logging to the client the number of cards played. what you could do, you could set up a command that actually replicates it on all clients, but we don't need to do that here. I drop another card and I see that, oh, okay, I've dropped 2 cards here. And you do the same. And then I've played 3 cards, 4 cards, so on and so forth. And you're doing the same. The point here is not that you or I are sharing information over the network with the cards that are played. The point is that I'm storing a sync variable of the number of cards that I've played, so that if you needed to access that as the client or server, that variable is synced across all of our machines. That's especially useful if I like have health that I want to be synced, or cards played is just an example, but it's not exactly useful for me here because I'm not able to see how many cards you've played in this build of it, whereas I can see them when I'm playing as the host. Similarly, let's just switch things around. So I'm playing as the host. No, you're playing as the host and I'm playing as the client. We've switched things around here. We're going to draw cards and draw cards here. I drop a card, or you drop a card in your host. I don't get any log of that. I drop a card in my client, and well, we don't have any a debugger here, so we're not able to see any of that. So that's kind of problematic. On the one hand, we're tracking how many cards each of us have played, but on the other hand, I can only see the logs in one place, which is my my client, which is in the editor. So we're going to do something that's a little bit funny and strange, as it was for me. And I don't often recommend just like copy and pasting code from elsewhere. This is very much a do as I say, not as I do sort of thing. But what we're going to do here is we're going to create an empty game object in our scene, and we're going to call it debug log display. And attached to it, we're going to create a new script. New script, we're going to call it same thing, debug log display. Very helpfully shared to me from a member of the Discord community for Mirror. It's just helpful in our debugging process while we're creating the game. Definitely not something we want to include with the fully finished game. Okay, so the objective here is actually, it's pretty simple, but the way to do it is a bit complicated, which is why I say do as I say, not as I do. In that we want the client that's built to display the log information the same way that we have it on our player, on our editor. And the script for this, for me at least, is like nothing that I've seen in Unity, so it might be new to you, but we're just going to say public string output is equal to nothing, just empty parentheses. Public string stack is equal to the same. And then void on enable application dot log message received is plus equals handle log void on disable application dot log message receive minus equal handle log. Okay, and then we'll write the void handle log string, log string, comma, string stack trace, log type. That's going to be our method. Let's run. Output equals log string, and stack equals stack trace. Okay. I wouldn't worry too much about this. I'm not sure how much you'll make use of it. It certainly has been helpful for me in debugging and figuring out how my code should work. And I'll show you what it does in a minute. We also need to add private, we can just call this void on GUI or on GUI. GUI.label new rectangle 150, 5, 800, 60, output, which is creating a box for this stuff to live in, and GUI.label new rectangle 150, 65, 800, 60 stack. Just creating labels for the stuff that we've created. All this does is a really long way of saying take the logs that are usually logged to this console here and print them on the screen when the application is run. It's really not much more than that. And that's all we need. So let's save that. Let's build it. Build. And you'll get this error sometimes. Failed to prepare target build directory. Is a built game instance running? And as warned, yes it is. I need to close that before I can try and build a new game. And that'll happen to you once every 5 minutes. Because remember, we're doing this quite a bit. So it's every time you make a change to your script that you that has networking that you want to work with, you need to close your running client and build it again and make sure that it runs, and then run it as the host or the client, and then open your editor, hit play, run it as a host or a client, and you'll see now that I have a bunch of logs that are not only on this screen in my editor, but I see my start host client has been called up here at the top of my application. When I hit draw cards, I draw cards as normal, and then I have debugged. I've logged. I've logged to the debug console that I've played one card here in my client, and now when you do the same, finally you can see how many cards you've played up here. And I've played another card. That's 2. You've played another card. That's also 2. We could create like I said, we could create a command that that now shows me replicates on my client the number of cards that you've played and the number of cards that I've played. We just don't need to do that right now. The point is that we've created a sync variable in our player manager that is just called int cards played. And when I play a card, I not only should do this whole waterfall of what should happen there with the game object, but I should increment cards played and then debug and then log it to the console, and that should it essentially it should store this information on the server so that every client, if you wanted to access this from a different client, you should be able to access this as well, because the server syncs this across all clients. And then it logs it to the number of cards that I've played to my console. But we've also added a essentially like a small console here on the application as well, so that if you're trying to debug stuff and you're just not getting any logs here in the application, you should be able to now. And if you need to move it around the screen, you can do that by messing with the debug log display script that we looked at here in our scripts. Oh, I didn't actually move it over from the assets folder, but anyway, that's where it should live. So yeah, you now have a fully functioning multiplayer 2D card game using Unity. I really could not encourage you more to check out the mirror documentation, although I must admit some of it is a little bit deprecated, like they do things a little bit more different than some of the documentation suggests, but it's still pretty clean. Check out the tutorials, check out the videos that I've linked in the description. Hang out on the Mirror Discord, as there are a lot of things different about attempting to do a network game in Unity from just doing a single player game. I'm sure you've experienced most of them with me over the course of the past 2 videos, but there's certainly a lot more out there. You can do a lot more with sync variables and sync events, sync lists, and serialization that we haven't touched here in these videos. But I hope these videos have been helpful for you. If they have, please like them and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Twitter or check out my books and games. And we'll see you again soon for more.